Hey everybody. Um, Before I begin, I want to share a quick quote with you by Andrew Murray. I think he says something that's very important before we jump into the little bit of text that I want to share. He says, we find the Christian life difficult because we seek for God's blessing while we live according to our own will. He goes on to say, we make our own plans and choose our own work, and then we ask the Lord Jesus to watch and see that sin does not overtake us and that we do not wander too far from the path. But our relationship to Jesus ought to be such that we are entirely at his disposal. Every day we should go to him first, humbly and straightforwardly, and say, Lord, is there anything in me that is not according to your will, that has not been ordered by you, or that is not entirely given over to you? What would you have me to do today? And I just reading that, just there's so much packed into that quote just in general, but I want you to really pay attention to this first part. We find the Christian life difficult because we seek for God's blessing while we live according to our own will. Um, I'm going to be reading out of Psalms 143, and I was just going to do one verse, but I think I'm going to do verses 7 through 12. But just really quickly, and based off of what Andrew Murray said right there in that quote, I want you to think about things you hear people say. We hear people say things like, God bless America, and we constantly ask God to move and do something on our behalf, right? When we've decided that whatever has come up on us is too big for us to handle. Now God is somebody that we need in the picture. When our plans and our projects fail, now we need God. But I said this some years back. I've said it in a sermon, just in regular talks with people in general. But we say things like, God bless America. But let me ask you this question. When is America going to bless God? And I use that because, yes, that's where I'm at here in America. But we can put any country on this planet, its name in place of America. When is whatever going to bless him instead of always trying to seek out God's blessing, right? Here in Psalms 143, David is under distress. He's, running from his enemies. He feels overwhelmed. He's not quite sure if he's going to survive what's coming at him. But let me just there are a couple things in the midst of him saying all that he's saying here that I really want to focus on, and it really has to do with the will of the Lord, and learning his ways and all of that. But I want you to pay attention. So verses 7 through 12. Come quickly, Lord, and answer me, for my depression deepens. Don't turn away from me, or I will die. Let me hear of your unfailing love each morning, for I am trusting you. Show me where to walk, for I give myself to you. Rescue me from my enemies, Lord. I run to you to hide me. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. May your gracious spirit lead me forward on a firm footing. For the glory of your name, O Lord, preserve my life. Because of your faithfulness, bring me out of this distress. In your unfailing love, silence all my enemies and destroy all of my foes, for I am your servant. One thing I really like about the Psalms is the transparency of David and some of the other writers of particular Psalms. But I like how he gets really honest here at the end where he says, silence all of my enemies and destroy all my foes. Right? It's take them out, wipe them out, destroy them. Right? And, that can be in many different ways, but just think about the pressure he's under, and he's, not only does he want to be rescued, but he wants God to bring justice upon those who have wrongfully accused him of things and who are wrongfully pursuing and trying to take his life. But even with that being said, that was kind of like a quick rabbit trail. But what I want to really talk about is, in the midst of this stuff that's going on with David, he still finds a way to seek God out in other ways. Yes, he asks to be rescued. Yes, he asks for God's help, but he also asks some important things in the midst of this. He says, show me where to walk, for I give myself to you, in the second part of verse 8. And then in verse 10, he says, teach me to do your will, for you are my God. And he goes on to say, may your gracious spirit lead me forward on firm footing. I need to know the path to be on at this moment, right? And I need to know what you're doing. What is your will in the midst of what's going on here? So we can look at this, I believe, in a couple different ways. One way that we could look at this is as if, and I guess you could say, when we're in trouble, we promise things just to get God's help, right? And you can see that many people do that all the time, right? You think of a very important book that's needed, right? And you see I got these bookshelves all over the place. But a very important book like the Bible would be placed on the shelf until we have a hard time, and then we pull it off and we have to dust it off and open up the pages, and finally we need God. I think you can look at this from that perspective if we just see David as complaining, and it may be a little bit of that in here. I'm not going to say that it's not any of that in here, but you could also look at this from a different perspective and see that in troubling times, through tough times, right? When we're walking through that valley of shadow of death, right? And David said before, you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me, right? There are times where things get really tough in our life, and we ought to be seeking out God's ways and what he wants done, even in the midst of that. Let me say it this way. We shouldn't just seek God's will, and we shouldn't seek the proper path to be on when everything is going good, right? Whether it's a mountaintop experience or everything is peaceful around us. Troubling times ought to call us calls us to do the exact same thing, right? We should ask God to rescue us when people are pursuing us and they're wrongfully accusing us. We should ask God to rescue us, to advocate for us, to speak on our behalf, to do something to those people that are wrongfully doing things to us. We should be doing that. But even in the midst of that, we ought to be seeking God, what is your will in this situation? What is it that you would have me to do? Right? That's simply something that ought to become a regular part of the life of those who follow the Lord. If you read I'm going to read verse 8 in its entirety instead of just reading that second part. He says, let me hear of your unfailing love each morning, for I am trusting you. Right? It's like when I wake up, let me know that this unfailing love of yours is right there with me. Think about that. It's an expectation of waking up in the place that I want to be. I want to wake up surrounded by your unfailing love. He says, for I am trusting you. Then that's where he transitions and says, show me where to walk, for I give myself to you. Trusting God and knowing that he's trustworthy, that he loves me in the midst of whatever I got going on here. Even, and let me say this because this is important, even if I got myself in the mess, right? And I'm not saying that that's what happened here to David, but even if I got myself in the mess that I'm in, your unfailing love, your mercies, and all of that will be there right there in the morning with me. I'm trusting you. But same thing as when he says, teach me to do your will, for you are my God, in verse 10, and asking that the Spirit of the living God lead him forward on a firm footing. He's asking God to show what needs to be done, right? Think about it this way. When you're not in a time of chaos, when you're not in the midst of a storm, let me say it that way. When you're not in the midst of things that are causing you to be disturbed in some kind of way, those times we find it easy to seek out God's will and seeking out the best way to move and navigate the different type of times that we're living in, right? We find it easier because our thoughts are not racing, because we're worried about whatever is going on, and we find it easy. But it's tougher to be able to ask God, what is your will right now? Show me, teach me to do your will, even right now. Right? It's not like David is saying, I don't know your will at all, right? That we know that that's not true. We can go back to David when he was a teenager, where he showed up to fight Goliath, right? We can't say that he don't know God's will at all. We know that David has messed up many times, right? But he's still considered to be, excuse me, a man after God's own heart, right? So it's not like he don't know God's will at all, but sometimes in certain seasons and while we're going through things, we need to know what you're doing right now in the midst of this, Lord, right? A lot of times when we see, and I'll use an example of somebody getting a serious illness, you'll hear people immediately begin to pray, right? Asking God to heal the person, and we should be doing that. But part of what we say in our prayers is something like, I've heard people pray that because I know it's your will for us to always be healed and different things like that. And I'm not quite sure I agree with that. Would it be God's will for there to be a world that we live in where there should not be any illness at all, right? And it shouldn't we God's will for there not to be sin running rampant in the world that we live in? Yes. But I think we try to make ourselves sound really spiritual by saying, "Oh, it's your will for us not to be sick, and it's your will for us to be healed," and we say things like that. But one of the things that I've gotten in the habit to do is when I know that with somebody either I know or somebody that I'm praying on behalf of their family member, their loved one, because they reveal that this person is sick, I do pray for the person's healing, but I always try to seek God's will in the midst of what's going on. So I seek God's will for the person, but I also seek God's will for me, right? What do you want me to do right now? How do you want me to be here for this person? How do you want me to comfort them and encourage them? If it's somebody that's close to me that's sick, how do you want me to pray about them? See, sometimes we seek God out. How do I pray right now in the midst of what this person is going on? Yes, I want this person to be healed, but how do you really want me to pray right now? Because sometimes it's hard to know exactly what to pray. And I believe that David is like right now in the midst of his situation, right? He wants to be careful in everything that he's doing, right? Show me where to walk for I give myself to you, right? That's probably part of him wanting to be rescued and protected and all of that. But even in the midst of that, you know, sometimes we can think that the trouble we have could be because we did something wrong and maybe God is punishing us, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that's what's happening here, but sometimes that begins to run through our mind. Man, did I do something that's causing these things to come up on me? You know, how can I correct things? Lord, I don't want to make another mistake. Show me where I should be walking right now. Show me which way to go, because I give myself to you, right? Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. I need to know exactly what's going on right now in this moment. I need to know how to handle things the best way. And if you show me the way to handle these things, then I would know. And it'll be handled correctly and rightly. And I'll be doing what's right in your sight. And, I'm gonna get ready to close here. But when he says, "May your gracious spirit lead me forward on firm footing," he understood. Just like many in this first Testament period, right? The Old Testament is what we call it. They understood where the Spirit of the Lord was on them, and when the Spirit of the Lord moved, and when the Spirit of the Lord led them, it was a powerful thing. And they knew that with the Spirit of the Lord there, they could count on him. And they could be safe. And they didn't have to fear anything. And David begins to close. "For the glory of your name, O Lord, preserve my life. Because of your faithfulness, bring me out of this distress. Again, in your unfailing love, silence all my enemies and destroy all my foes, for I am your servant." He begins to call upon the character of God, right? Your name, for your name's sake. And that's a theme throughout Old Testament period, that God would begin to move on behalf of Israel for his name's sake, right? Even if they messed up and committed sin and turned away and began to worship idols and these other gods, for his name's sake, he would go and rescue them. And for his name's sake, he would do this. And for his name's sake, he would punish these other nations and all of this. And David is calling upon the character of God right now. He continues to talk about God being faithful, his unfailing love. And for your name's sake, he's calling upon the character of God. I know your character. See, this is what I meant by when I said that he knew God. Not just have this head knowledge, but he's walked with God and experienced some things with God for some time now. And he understands some things. For your name's sake, rescue me. And see, we have to begin to think about how much we truly do know God. How much do we truly know? Because when we truly know him, his plan and his project comes first. And there's no need for us to always be seeking out his blessing, right, while we're walking according to our own will, as Andrew Murray talked about. When we truly know God, we will be constantly seeking out his will in the good times and even in the times where we're distressed, right? We may ask him for the help we need, but we still want to make sure that we're acting accordingly to somebody that would follow him. And one interesting thing as I get ready to close, you just think about, let's fast forward into the New Testament times in the Gospels, and how many people, as Jesus was coming through towns and villages, and some people followed him out of those towns and villages and walked many miles and many days with him into different places before they went back to their homes. You know, many people, I'm pretty sure, were impacted, but many people, after they got the blessing of whatever it was, healing or whatever it was, maybe they got the food, you know, maybe they saw a miracle. But after they got whatever it is that they came for, they went back to their regular scheduled programs, to their regular lives. And until it was time that they needed a blessing again. And if we're honest, many people do that today within the church. And we wonder why outsiders, and I'm using outsiders in the sense of those that don't go to church, those that do not want to have anything to do with Jesus for whatever reason, whether they think something else is a better way of living, or they just been hurt by people that's supposed to be followers of Jesus, whatever the reason is, but they don't want to have anything to do with the church. Maybe it's because they see that those that claim to follow find it difficult to live that life themselves. And really, to tell you the truth, they only call upon the Lord when they need him. There's much that needs to be changed in our lives. Seek his will in the good and the bad times. Let our lives be the example that's needed and the light that shines in darkness, so that we can lead others to the amazing light that comes from our Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ. Grace, mercy, and peace be with you.